7 #1 singles in a row. A record-breaking run no other band in UK history has achieved. To the world, Westlife looked unstoppable. 5 boys from Ireland who turned pop ballads into anthems for a generation. But what fans didn't see was the cost. Fractured friendships, hidden struggles, financial ruin, and the painful choice to walk away at the height of their fame. Shane Filan, born July 5, 1979. Nicky Byrne, born October 9, 1978. Kian born April 29, 1980. Mark Feehily, born May 28, 1980. And Brian McFadden, born April 12, 1980. Together they would become Westlife. This is not just the story of chart success. It is the story of relentless ambition, emotional sacrifice, and ultimate redemption. A story of how Westlife's pursuit of dominance in the music industry almost destroyed them, yet, against all odds, brought them back together. It began in the small town of Sligo, Ireland. 3 school friends, Shane Filan, Kian and Mark Feehily, formed a local group in 1997. Alongside them were Derek Lacey, Graham Keegren, and Michael Garrett, making it a 6-piece. They called themselves IOU, performing at local shows and chasing a dream that felt impossibly distant. At first, rejection was all they knew. Record companies turned them down. Crowds were small, but their passion burned too brightly to quit. Shane brought the powerhouse vocals. Mark, shy but soulful, found freedom in singing. Kian, the leader, carried relentless drive. Together, they refused to accept failure. Their break came when Boyzone's manager, Louis Walsh, heard about them. But Walsh wasn't convinced 6 was the magic number. He cut 3 original members, keeping only Shane, Mark, and Kian. Then, after nationwide auditions, 2 new boys joined. Nicky Byrne, a former footballer with dreams bigger than the pitch, and Brian McFadden, a Dublin teenager with charm and attitude. A new band was born. At first, they called themselves Westside, preparing for their first single. But when legal issues arose, another band had the name. They rebranded as Westlife. 5 Irish boys, 1 dream, and a destiny about to explode beyond anything they could have imagined. In April 1999, everything changed. Westlife released their debut single, Swear It Again. Almost overnight, the song shot straight to #1 in both Ireland and the UK. For a band that had once faced endless rejection, it was a moment of vindication. The boys from Sligo were now standing on top of the charts. But success this sudden comes at a cost. Shane Filan, just 19 at the time, later admitted the whirlwind felt unreal, like he was living someone else's life. One day he was a small-town boy, the next he was facing cameras, flashing lights, and fans who knew his name. Mark Feehily, quiet and introverted, found the fame overwhelming. He loved the music, but the constant attention, the endless interviews, and the pressure to perform began to feel suffocating. For him, the stage was freedom, but everywhere else, the spotlight felt like a prison. Kian, full of energy, thrived in the chaos, pushing the group forward. But even he confessed that the schedule was grueling, promotion after promotion, barely time to breathe. Nicky Byrne, still proving himself vocally, felt the weight of expectation on his shoulders, constantly questioning if he belonged. And Brian McFadden, charismatic and outspoken, enjoyed the attention, but struggled to balance fame with his responsibilities as a young father. Behind the cheers and chart-topping headlines, the reality was setting in. Westlife were no longer ordinary Irish lads. They were celebrities, expected to be perfect every single day. Their dream had come true, but it came with chains they could not yet see. Swear It Again was more than a debut single. It was the start of an unstoppable rise. But it was also the beginning of pressures that would one day test the very bond holding them together. By the year 2000, Westlife were no longer just a rising band, they were a force. Their second album, Coast to Coast, was more than a hit. It was a phenomenon. The album stormed to #1 in the UK, outselling even the Spice Girls, and solidified Westlife as global superstars. With songs like Flying Without Wings and My Love, they weren't just topping charts, they were creating anthems that would define a generation. Concert arenas filled with screaming fans, and the boys from Sligo were suddenly playing to tens of thousands across the world. But the glory came with a hidden cost. Their schedule was relentless: recording sessions, back-to-back interviews, photo shoots, and endless tours. Westlife were conquering the charts, breaking records, and living a dream. But as their fame reached new heights, so did the pressures pulling at them from every side. The world saw perfection. But behind the curtain, the boys were learning that global success came with sacrifices they were only beginning to understand. By the early 2000s, Westlife seemed unstoppable. Every release turned to gold. World of Our Own, Queen of My Heart, and even their cover of Uptown Girl dominated the charts. For Mark Feehily, the weight was even greater. Quiet and introverted, he carried a truth he couldn't yet share with the public: his sexuality. In an industry obsessed with image, he feared that honesty could shatter the dream millions had bought into. So he sang with a smile, while inside, he lived with silence. March 2004. At the very peak of their fame, Westlife seemed invincible. Brian McFadden, one of the band's most charismatic voices, stunned the world by announcing he was leaving. Officially, he said it was to spend more time with his family and pursue a solo career. But behind the polished statement lay a storm of pressure and restlessness. He wanted freedom, creativity, individuality, a life outside the Westlife machine. For the fans, it was heartbreak. Shane Filan, who had been closest to Brian since the beginning, felt the wound deepest. He later admitted it was like losing a brother overnight. The four who remained, Shane, Mark, Kian, and Nicky, stand in front of cameras, smile, and promise they would go on. And they did. But something had changed forever. The five-part harmony that defined their rise was broken. The brotherhood was fractured. And though Westlife survived, the shadow of Brian's departure never fully left them. Westlife could have folded after Brian's departure, but they refused. With 4 voices instead of 5, they released You Raise Me Up. A song that became an anthem of resilience. Once again, they topped charts and sold out arenas across the globe. To the outside world, it seemed nothing could stop them. But behind the flawless harmonies, the weight was crushing. Shane Filan, under the illusion that success would last forever, poured his earnings into risky property ventures. It was a gamble that would one day leave him on the brink of financial ruin. Nicky, meanwhile, faced a different struggle, balancing the demands of international fame with the pull of fatherhood. Every tour meant leaving his young family behind. For years they smiled on stage, sang their ballads, and lived up to the legend of Westlife. Yet offstage, their lives were quietly unraveling. For 14 years, Westlife had ruled the charts. They were the soundtrack of a generation. Love songs, wedding anthems, stadium tours that felt unstoppable. But in October 2011, the unthinkable happened. The band announced they were splitting up. Publicly, they said it was to end on a high. But behind the polished statement, the truth was harder. Years of exhaustion, relentless pressure, financial strain, and broken trust had taken their toll. They were brothers who loved one another, but also men worn down by the machine of fame. Fans wept. Tickets for their farewell tour sold out in minutes. Each night became a funeral in disguise. Songs that once symbolized joy now carried the weight of goodbye. For Shane Filan, the timing was brutal. Just as Westlife ended, his property investments collapsed, plunging him into bankruptcy and personal crisis. While the world mourned the band, Shane quietly fought to keep his family afloat. And so, in 2012, Westlife walked away. 4 men who had given their youth to music, now stepping into silence, unsure if they would ever find their way back. When Westlife's farewell tour ended, the silence was deafening. For the first time in nearly 15 years, Shane, Mark, Kian, and Nicky were no longer Westlife. They were just men trying to rebuild. Shane Filan launched a solo career, but behind the spotlight he battled the devastating reality of bankruptcy. Once one of Ireland's brightest stars, he now faced the humbling task of starting over. Mark Feehily, after years of secrecy, finally came out publicly. It was a moment of courage, embracing authenticity after living with silence for so long. His journey was no longer about fame, but freedom. Kian took a different path, stepping into television. His charisma won him a new audience, and even the Jungle Crown when he triumphed on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. And Nicky built a steady career in radio and TV, carving a space beyond the band. Each man found survival, even success. Yet through all the reinventions, one truth lingered. Without Westlife, something was missing. In 2018, 7 years after their farewell, the silence finally broke. To mark their 20th anniversary, Westlife announced their reunion, and the world erupted in joy. Fans who had grown up with their music flooded back, ready to relive the magic. But the reunion still came with a bitter news. Brian McFadden, the fifth original member, chose not to return. He had long moved on with his solo career, carving his own path away from the group. And so, it was Shane, Mark, Kian, and Nicky who stood together once more, four voices carrying the legacy of five. This time, the comeback wasn't about chasing number ones. It was about healing old wounds, reclaiming joy, and finding balance. Their new single, Hello My Love, written by Ed Sheeran, proved they still had the power to dominate. But now the music was infused with something richer: gratitude. Across arenas worldwide, the cheers were deafening. For the band, standing side by side again was more than a career move. It was redemption, a second chance at brotherhood. Today, with more than 55 million records sold, Westlife are etched into history as one of the greatest boy bands of all time. Their journey was never just about pop ballads, it was about resilience. They had it all: fame, fortune, and the world at their feet. Then they lost it. Fame faded, money crumbled, friendships strained. But through heartbreak, through bankruptcy, through silence, they found their way back. Now, in a new era, Westlife's legacy carries a deeper truth. It isn't measured only in number one singles or sold-out arenas. It lives in the way four men learned to forgive, to survive, and to stand together again. Because in the end, Westlife's greatest harmony was never just in their music. It was in their unity. Their story is a reminder that even after the hardest goodbyes, sometimes you can still find your way home.
Hey, thanks for watching this amazing story, and welcome to Video Biographer, where every life has a story and every story deserves to be told. If you believe that every person has a journey worth knowing, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a life story that could inspire or inform you. Ready to explore more? Choose one of the videos on your screen and discover a life that you should know about. This is Video Biographer, where stories live and life speak. See you in my next video. If there's a life story you'd like me to cover, drop your suggestion in the comments. Until then, stay blessed and take care.